In this demonstration, I'm going to configure the AWS transfer family so that I can use SSH with FTP, so SFTP, to transfer files from a Linux host into an S3 bucket. So let's first go to the S3 management console and check out the bucket that will ultimately be our target. So I've got an existing bucket here called demo-bucket-3657, and there's nothing in it. So we're going to be using that. The next thing I need to do is I need to set up an IAM role to enable a trust relationship, basically so the permissions are in place for users to do this. So I'm going to go to IAM, I'll click roles on the left, and I'm going to click create role over on the right for an AWS service. And I'm going to use EC2 under common use cases, and I'll click next. Now what I want to do is I want to attach a permissions policy. I'll search for S3 full. And it's going to be the Amazon S3 full access policy. So then after that, I'll click next. For the role name, maybe I'll call it user SFTP access. And I'll just go down to the bottom right and click create role. So it won't take long for that role to have been created. So I'm going to search it up, user SFTP. There it is, user SFTP access. What I need to do here is go to Trust Relationships, Edit, Trust Policy. Now, currently, the allowment of access to services is for ec2.amazonaws.com. To use AWS Transfer, that needs to say transfer.amazonaws.com. Okay, once it does, you can click Update Policy, and that part's done. So if I search for SFTP here up at the top and go into AWS Transfer Family, we can set up our SSH-based SFTP server. So in the servers view on the left, we don't have any server shown on the right because it's not ever been set up. So I'm going to go ahead and click Create Server. And we have a choice of the protocol support we want to enable for our file-based server. I'm going to leave it on the default of SFTP, SSH File Transfer Protocol, and I'll click Next. I'll leave it on Service Managed where I get to control the user accounts with this specific service as opposed to linking my SFTP server to AWS Directory Service or something like that. So I'm just going to go ahead and click Next. I'm going to leave it as being publicly accessible over the internet in this particular case, and I'll just leave it on None to use the default server endpoint. If your organization or agency needs to comply with Federal Information Processing Standards or FIPS, then you could enable it as a FIPS-enabled endpoint. I'm not going to do that. I'm going to click Next. Now I want to allow access to an S3 bucket, so I'll leave it on Amazon S3 and I'll click Next. So I'm just going to scroll all the way down. I'm not going to change anything here and I'll click Next. And then in the bottom right, I'll click the Create Server button. Okay, our server is shown as being listed here with no users. So if I select the check mark to the left of the server, then the Add User button becomes available. Let's add user M. Bishop, and for the role I'm going to assign this user, it's going to be the custom role we created that allows S3 access to the bucket. And I'll choose the demo bucket that we specified earlier when we were taking a peek around. Now, for the SSH public key, I need a public and a private key pair if I don't already have one generated. The public key gets pasted in here and gets stored server-side. The private key is on the station you will use to transfer files into the S3 bucket over SSH with FTP, or SFTP. One way to generate a key pair, if you haven't got a pair already, is to use the ssh-keygen command, whether you've got Linux support on Windows or whether you're at a Linux host. So it's going to generate a unique public and private RSA key pair. It wants the default file name to save the private key in. The file will be called ID_RSA. I'm okay with that. I'm going to put in a passphrase. Private key files should always have a passphrase for security reasons. And I'll enter the same passphrase again. And notice what it will have done is in the same directory, it will have created the public key in a file called ID_RSA.pub. So if I navigate to that directory location and type dir, there are the two files. I'm going to use Notepad, though, to open up the ID_RSA.pub file. And what I need to do here is I need to copy this public key in its entirety, because that is what I'm going to paste into the SSH public keys field here to create user mbishop. So let's go ahead and click Add. And then it says it successfully created our user mbishop. So now if I go and click on the server ID link, under users, mbishop is shown here. And notice the home directory is in the bucket in a folder called mbiship. And under public keys, it has a value of 1. What I need to do here is copy this endpoint. This is the default DNS name for this SFTP server, and I need that if I want to make a connection to it. And so, from the command line on my machine, I'm going to run sftp-i, and I'm going to specify the name of my private key file, which is id_rsa. Then I'll specify username mbiship at, and I'll paste in the DNS name of our AWS transfer server, and I'll press enter. Now, the first time you connect, you'll be asked to trust that host. I've already specified that, yes, I want to trust it. So what it's asking for is a passphrase for my private key file. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and enter that in. All right, I am now authenticated to my SFTP server. If I type pwd for print working directory, it tells me I'm in my demo bucket 3657 in a folder called mbiship. If I type ls, nothing is in there. So I'm going to use the sftp put command to put a file that I know I have in my local SSH folder on my local machine called project_a.txt. I'll press enter. Okay, it's uploading it. If I do an ls, now that file shows up in my S3 bucket folder. Let's check our work in the console. So back here in the console, I'll search for S3. We'll go into S3. We need to go into that demo bucket. Well, what do you know? We've got a folder called mbiship. Within that, we've got our project A TXT file. So it worked. We were able to use SFTP over an SSH encrypted connection to get content into an S3 bucket by configuring an AWS transfer server.